So it's great to have some familiar faces into the office and also many new faces too. So everyone please welcome on behalf of myself and Omega. As a recap, my name is Rick Towers. I'm the recruitment director for the UK. I look after all the recruitment for our business. And I head up the recruitment part of our business. There are three component parts to our business. We've been running for around 20 years now. I look after the recruitment part of our business. Our sister company, Datum RPO, a neutral vendor RPO business, and our engineering services business based in Cheltenham. They're the three component parts that make up Passionate About People. And as a business, we've been running for around 20 years now. In fact, it's 20 years as of March. So we're celebrating our 20-year anniversary. And in fact, supporting 20 local charities as a result of our 20-year anniversary. So that's our business, that's what we do. I think in terms of today, we've got lots of different organisations here for today's GDPR session. And in a moment I'll introduce Ian from BPE Solicitors. Ian's kindly going to lead the presentation for today. We have actually got some clients who said we'd love to come along but can't be there, so I hope it's okay. We've got a camera rolling at the back, so if you want to swear or sing or similar, wait till we're off camera, just for the sake of keeping the filming safe. The flow of today will probably be around 2.5 hours, something like that. We're hoping to get to around 11 o'clock, and if there's a need to break part way through, we might just take a break part way through, or we might work our way through. With teas and coffees at the back, with Danish pastries, cakes and similar. Please feel free to help yourself. Facilities, if anybody needs the facilities, back through the main office, reception on the right is where the ladies and gents facilities are. And just because it's raining, I'm going to cover this, we're not expecting a fire drill. If the bell does go, I'm afraid it could be a real fire drill, and so the fire wards will escape, escort us to the safest exit and meet in the car park where we congregate. But we're not expecting any fire drills. Just before I hand over to Ian, GDPR has been a big subject on the horizon for around a year now, and I think there's lots of people with lots of questions. And the objective of today is to try and talk about GDPR, why it's come to pass, where it stands presently, and what the future looks like with GDPR in our worlds. And from a business perspective, one of the things we want to look at more of is engage more clients with thought practice leadership, roundtable events, give a bit back in terms of the partnership. So today is one of a series of events. And at the end of the room, we've got some feedback forms, but also ask for your feedback on what else you as a business would like to receive from Omega. If it's more thought practice leadership events, more roundtable events, more social events, table tennis tournament or similar, we'd be happy to host any of those. So if I can collect feedback from folk at the end of today, that'd be really appreciated. I think with Matt, Steve and Ben's help, we'll collect as much feedback as we can. That's it from me. I'll hand over to Ian with a thank you. Ian's given up his time to help with today's presentation. I think it's an interactive session for folk to ask questions. There's no script per se.
No script at all.
No script at all. So Ian from BPE Solicitors will lead today's session. I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you all.
Right, well, good morning everyone. I'll start with an apology. I am at death's door this morning, or if you listen to my wife, I have a cold. Either way, I'm drugged up the items and medication, so it's entirely possible at some point this morning I'm going to start spouting absolute rubbish. If anything sounds unbelievable, feel free to ask me to clarify it. The problem is, this is GDPR, and actually some of the things that I say that sound unbelievable might actually be true. But that's simply the nature of the beast. There's a lot we're going to try and cover today. Had you come to this sort of presentation 6 months ago, the good news is it would have been about an hour long, because all we had was the GDPR and nothing else. Since then, we've had some guidance notes published by the UK. In fact, we've pushed it out to about an hour and a half, and then some guidance notes from elsewhere in Europe, pushed out to about 2 hours. Then we had the Data Protection Bill, which has been published by the UK government, we've pushed it out to about 3 hours. So what we're going to try and do is, before this gets to 4 hours, is try and cover everything in 2.5 hours for you. What that means is we can cover just about all the main relevant areas of the GDPR. What we're not going to do is go into huge detail into every single area. So if there are any areas that I'm not covering in enough detail, feel free to shout out questions. As you said, there is no script for this. It's about the 25th-ish version of this that I've done. So most of this, in fact all of this, is coming from memory. I don't think I have any of those 25 versions we stuck to the slides. So if you do have queries, you do have questions that are relevant for your business, the chances are if you're thinking of a question, so is everybody else in the room. So feel free to shout out as we're going along. Otherwise, if you don't want to do it in this forum, feel free to save up your questions to the end and come and have a word with me at the end. I'm happy to stay around for a bit longer and answer questions at the end. Now, the first one of these that I ever attended as a delegate started with a slide that said, if you get all this wrong, you can be fined millions and millions and millions of pounds. What I don't want to do is create a scare story. There are too many of those around at the moment. This isn't a case of get it wrong, you're going to be fined millions of pounds, because the chances are you're not. What I want to try and do is come up with practical ideas as to what you need to implement to get over the hump before the 25th of May. Now, the ICO has been quite open to a certain extent to say, look, there's a lot of stuff here. I know there's a lot of stuff here for businesses to do, and admittedly you've had 2 years to get used to it, because the regulation was published just under 2 years ago. But they understand that businesses haven't been doing this for 2 years, they're starting to get ready now. So what they're saying is, as long as you're putting in place some of the basic stuff now, before May, then we don't necessarily expect you to be fully compliant by the end of May. As long as you've got plans in place to do the rest of the stuff you haven't yet done, we'll work with you for an interim period, transitional period. Now, nowhere in the legislation does it say there's an interim transitional period to allow you to get ready. The new law comes into play at the end of May. 25th of May to be precise, Friday, so if you're as sad as us at the office, we are having a GDPR party at 5 o'clock on Friday night, in which case we tend to get completely sozzled. But the promise is not going to go away on the 26th of May, because businesses will not be fully compliant on the 26th of May. So the ICO, the regulator, has not said there's 6 months, there's 12 months, there's whatever period we're going to allow you to get ready. What they're saying is, look, if you're trying, and you can demonstrate you're trying, we'll help you, we'll work with you, even after this date, to try and get you ready. Look, if this time next year you're still not doing it right, it might be a different story. But it's not an absolute deadline of the 25th of May. So what's happening on that date? The Data Protection Act that we know enough is disappearing in its entirety to be replaced by the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and the Data Protection Act 2018, which is currently called the Data Protection Bill. Why are there two pieces of legislation? Well, because Brexit is happening. Now, whether you are in favour of it or against it, actually it doesn't really have any impact on this, because if we weren't leaving the EU, then all we'd be doing is implementing the General Data Protection Regulation the same as the rest of Europe. The fact that we probably are leaving eventually at some point, maybe, the GDPR will actually cease to apply, because the GDPR is an EU piece of legislation. If you're not in the EU, GDPR won't apply to you per se. So what the UK government has done is introduce the Data Protection Bill, which says that if the GDPR doesn't apply, the Data Protection Bill says basically the same thing. And being the UK, it says a few additional things as well. Now, the reason why we're here, it's kind of our own fault. So data protection happened for the first time, give or take, in the mid-80s, where it was realised that people's personal information was being used for reasons that people didn't agree with. So we introduced the Data Protection Act in the mid-80s, and by the mid-90s, the EU decided, you know what, there's so much data going around Europe, being transmitted around Europe, we're now one continent, one union, etc., etc., that we need consistent laws amongst all EU member states. Perfectly laudable idea. So that triggered the Data Protection Act 1998, which actually came from another piece of European legislation. So when it came into force in 2000, all EU member states had pretty much the same law. Except we're British. And the British courts interpreted the same law entirely differently to everywhere else in Europe. So since 1998, whilst we started at the same place, the rest of Europe has stayed on the steady course, we've gone out there. And what happened a few years ago, Europe recognised this, and the UK had been fined a number of times for not complying with EU data protection laws. So the EU said, look, let's do it again. Let's have another European law and bring the UK back into line. That's effectively why we're here with the GDPR. So if you ask any colleagues out in the continent, they'll look at the GDPR and think, yeah, so what? It's what we've always been doing. There's no real change for us. It's only really in the UK this has come as a bit of a surprise, largely because over the last 20 years, we've diverged from where the rest of Europe is. So to a certain extent, yeah, there's a bit of mea culpa there. What I want to do is try and put this into context to start with, so we know what we're dealing with. So to give you an idea of where this fits, the entire British legislation on human cloning is contained in 200 odd words. Nice short little piece of legislation. We went to war in Iraq on the basis of just over 2,000 words. The US Constitution, 4.5. I guess the closest we've got to the British Constitution, just under 5,000. When the Human Rights Act came out, that was another piece of European legislation. The Human Rights Act was another monster piece of legislation. 10,000 words long. For those of you who went off to university and did your dissertations, that's sort of dissertation style length. That's a big piece of legislation. The Data Protection Act that we've got at the moment, that's today's law. Anybody, actually, before we go on, does anybody know the smallest piece of legislation ever made in the UK? It was the law that gave women the right to vote, about 20 words long. Is that of interest? The GDPR is not that small, but now if you want to be brave enough to hazard a guess as to how big we're looking at.
90,000.
Lots and lots of thousands. That's why it's such a big headache. Now the good news is half of that you haven't got to worry about, because half of that sets up the Information Commissioner's Office, the regulator, governs its relationship with Europe. Not something that day-to-day businesses are going to worry about on a day-to-day basis. If you're not involved in law enforcement or national security, again, there's probably a big chunk of that you haven't got to worry about, because a big chunk of that deals with data protection in those areas. But probably 40,000 of those words will apply to every single business on a daily basis. There is no way that you can attack GDPR in one big chunk. The easy way to do it is to divide it into bite-sized chunks and try and deal with individual bits. And I mentioned about getting the right bits in place by 25th of May. Well, it's all about prioritisation for now. I don't think between now and 25th of May, any business that's starting today will be able to get ready and do all of this. But there are certain parts of this you can do. And in terms of prioritisation, bear in mind that this is all complaint driven. So, and I'm not casting aspersions on any business here, but you may be the most non-compliant business in the world. But if nobody complains about you, nothing's going to happen. The only time you're ever going to get found out is if somebody complains to the ICO, to the regulator, and the ICO come knocking and they find you not to be compliant with this. So prioritisation means heading off complaints, stopping complaints being made. And how do you stop complaints being made? Well, I suspect you know your own business is better than anybody else. You'll know who within your organisation are most likely to complain. Is it going to be your employees, disgruntled ex-employees, customers, ex-customers, competitors? Wherever you think the complaints are going to come from, focus on those bits first. Get those bits right. If you get all the public-facing bits right, that's likely to mitigate or minimise your complaints. The back end might be completely non-compliant. But get that done over the next 12 months, because nobody knows, nobody's going to see that bit. Focus on the public-facing bits, and we'll come on to, at the very end, sort of a list of priorities of practical steps to get done. So, unfortunately, the first part of this is the sort of dour, black letter legal bits, because we've got to cover that to understand what's underpinning all of this. In order to do that, we're going to bandy around certain definitions, so it's important to get the definitions right. What we've got effectively are four players in terms of data protection. We've got controllers, processors, data subjects, and recipients. So the data controller is the organisation that controls, that owns the data. So your organisation is the controller of all its employees' data. It is the controller of all its customer data, its supplier data. All the data that you have within your organisation, the chances are you are the controller of it. Controller means you determine some element of discretion over how and why you use that information. The flip side of that is the processor. So that's somebody that you outsource some data processing service to. So prime examples, things like outsourcing payroll provision. So if you outsource your payroll provider doesn't have discretion over how and why to process that information. They can't decide, actually, Johnny, we're going to pay by cash this month, and Sarah, we're going to pay by cheque, and actually, you know what, Fred, we're getting double this month. There's no discretion. So because there's no discretion, the outsourced payroll provider is a processor. Things like cloud provider services, so you store your data in the cloud. You actually give your data to the cloud provider. They've got no discretion. They can't do anything with the data. They just store it for you. So again, they'll be a processor. But just bear in mind, not everybody you give data to, not everybody you give information to will be a processor. Sometimes they can be a controller in their own right. So take your lawyers, take your accountants, take your professional advisors. You may give them data about your organisation, about your employees, about your staff. But your lawyers and your accountants, your professional advisors retain an element of discretion about what to do. They don't have to, although you instruct them to do something, they have a discretion to do, well, yes, you might want to do it that way, but actually we think it's better to do it this way. That's what they're there for, to advise you. And because they retain that element of discretion, your lawyers, your professional advisors, they wouldn't be processors, they'd be controllers in their own right. So just bear in mind, not everybody you outsource data to will be a processor. Data subjects, you, me, everybody in the room, individuals. If you're an individual, you're a data subject. Now, as we're going through this, you'll be looking at it with two hats on. First, from your business perspective, you're the controller, your employees, your customers have some of these rights against you, but don't forget, you're also a data subject when you go online shopping in the evening, or you act as a consumer. So look at it from both angles. Recipient is simply an external third party that you give your data to. So they could be processors, they could be controllers, they could be anybody. Now, the GDPR applies to the processing of personal data. Processing effectively means doing anything with data. There is a list in the GDPR, so here are examples of what processing means, but anything from collecting, looking at it, storing it, archiving it, deleting it, structuring it, anything you can possibly think of is deemed to be processing. So if you do anything with data, that would be processing. So when we use processing, just assume it means anything. Personal data is the important one because the GDPR only applies to personal data. Now, there's a very subtle difference between where we are today and where we'll be after 25th of May that makes a big difference in reality. So personal data today is any information from which you can identify a living person. Take somebody's computer username or IP address, or an email address like finance-director@. Based on that alone, you wouldn't necessarily be able to identify a living individual. Today, those examples, IP addresses, usernames, company email addresses like that, are not personal data. There's a subtle shift in terms of the definition. It now means any information relating to a data subject, which means you don't have to identify them from the information. So all of a sudden, your IP address, your username, the email address finance-director@, because they all relate to somebody, there is somebody sat at that computer that generates that IP address. There is somebody who's logged on using that username. There is an individual who receives the finance-director@ emails. Because they all relate to an individual, from May, they will all be personal data. There's been quite a lot of discussion, well there should have been, over business emails. So my email address, ian.garfield@bp.co.uk, today almost certainly isn't personal data. Come 25th of May, it will be. Now we've heard quite a few organisations, quite a few experts say that business email addresses won't be personal data. That's fine, you don't have to worry about them. Entirely wrong. If an email address relates to somebody, it will be personal data after May. So the definition of personal data is now